it's Minx. In the last video, we finally got our system to start. We built levels, we load level from file, and we can play levels. We don't have like a starting point or an end point defined or anything like that. We'll get there at some point, but that's not what I want to focus on today. For the longest time, we've been looking at blue, red squares with a black background and I think a white character, or like a white cube for a character. We're going to be changing that today, or starting today. We're going to create our kind of setup to handle assets. We're not going to necessarily load any assets this time. We're going to get them, we're going to get the process set up. And then in the next video, we're going to actually set up like loading assets on different, like on the character, on blocks and stuff. Because there's a way to do it inefficiently and there's a way to do it efficiently. And we may talk about that today, but we'll definitely talk about it in the next video where we're actually applying the changes. So just know that what we build today in this class, although we're not going to be utilizing it, has already been tested and does work. But there's other things we need to apply to other classes that will need to be changed as well. So we'll take a look at everything in the coming videos. So go ahead and create a new item. Call it Asset Manager. That's what I'm going to call mine here, or call it whatever you want. I put it in the game folder. You can put it in wherever you want. However you want to organize things, of course, that's up to you. And we're going to do a couple things. So I started off by making this as a like an instance class. It's like, all right, our Asset Manager is going to store all our references and stuff. And I'm not sure if that's a good idea. I ended up making it static and utilize it as like a sort of a utility tool, like a utility rather than a class that we have that has a lifespan. And we'll see why in a moment. We'll kind of see what the difference is, and it's like, what do we need to do? Do we need to store the information here or somewhere else? That's kind of the question we need to ask ourselves. So we're gonna have a base location. Let's go ahead and I put the summary up here. So summary: layer between the rest of the game and our assets. We'll unload and load assets from bundles. Technically, unloading is like unload the asset. It's dereference it. Don't do anything with it. Dispose, whatever, if we need to. In C#, we don't have like an actual destroy. Like I know Unity does, but we don't actually destroy things here. Like our I think our scrollable has some functions. Destroy it just deregisters them, so it's not being referenced anymore. And then the C# garbage collector will collect it. Anyway, we're going to do a similar thing we did with our, is it up here? No, with our game save manager. So we can actually copy this over the base location. And we're not going to use it today or anything. This is going to be kind of just a sits there and do nothing. But we're going to I just want to add assets to the end of it. So base location for assets is the same thing, /assets. Though we could probably move this to like be within the folder. So instead of like storing everything in our roaming and then be kind of weird, we'd probably store with the game. But for now, this is perfectly fine. We'll change it if we need to. And we're gonna do a similar thing we did with the game save manager. We're gonna say public asset manager. And if we make this static, this is probably not going to get used. Again, this is kind of just, some of this is just some theory crafting, not really doing anything. And we could just do, if directory doesn't exist, create the directory. So if we need to, we can. If not, we won't do it. So it's fine. The next thing we want to do is our main function for loading assets. So this one is it's not a hefty function, but it's got a lot of customizability because of how we're going to be, because of what we're going to be loading. Because different bitmaps and stuff end up having different variables that we need to account for. So we're going to be calculating those and utilizing them. So let's go ahead and make a new method inside of here. We're going to call it. For now, we won't make it static. We'll make it normal, so it's part of the instance. But we'll talk about making it static in a second. It's not too different. So we'll do public. We're going to make it an image. I'm going to call it load static asset. Not because the method is static, but because but because the asset is not going to be changing, or like what it pulls from is not going to be changing. So let's just do a string path for now. We can add some other stuff later. And then we're going to return or set up our return information here. So we're just going to do a new bitmap. Return bitmap equals new bitmap. And here we already know something that we need to do. So we're going to get rid of path here. And we're going to do int width and int height, and then just pass those through here. So width, height, and then return at the end. Just return if you enter a few times and return bitmap. So with the width and the height, and actually everything except for the path, we want to set a default. I'm going to do the default for these by 32 because I believe that's the default of the asset that I'm going to be using, which I will share with you guys. But equals 32 and height equals 32. Because we want the return image to be the same exact as the image that we pull from. So when we say read through the image, we want to start at the width and or end at the width and height of that image, or we'll get into it more. It'll make more sense. So now, how do we go through this? So let me see if I still have the page up here. Let's see, bitmap class. Okay, so what I started with is, if I bring this bitmap thing over, I started with this. So I found this bitmap class thing, and it said to go through the X and Y, grab the color, and then send that color over to set pixel image 1. And I'm not sure, so it was like setting the red value, but it was setting the blue and the green to 0, which we don't need to do, but this tells me everything I need to know about what I need to do. So we have, and this is why we have it. So what we do is we essentially create a image that or a bitmap that we can set the values to. We load the bitmap from the parameter, then we go through pixel by pixel, get the value of this part of the image that we want to, and then we set the pixel of the original, like the quote unquote return image, and then we're good. So that's what we're going to do. It's similar to this, but it's a bit more complicated because we're doing it differently. Well, we're not doing it differently, but we have more parameters and things that we want to take into account. So we're going to do the same for int x equals 0. X is less than, oh, hold on. We got to take this a step further here. If file.exists, so we're going to do a file exist check instead of a try catch like the example does, because I'm not a big fan of doing error handling like that. The exception should be exceptional, not expect to have the exception every time and catch it. So we're going to do a if file exists. We're going to make a bitmap, and we're going to call it temp bitmap equals new bitmap path. Now this will load the entire image in. So let me actually, can I, let's see here. Here we go. And I'll be bringing this up so you guys can see it. And actually, hold on, let me move this over here. I think I already have it pulled out into a folder. Here we go. Okay, so what I'm going to be looking for today, or not today, we're not going to be using it today, but we're going to be using is this, and I think it's add tiles. No, not tiles. I'm not sure where it is. That's the, I think it's this. Yeah, we're going to be starting with this. So my goal is by the end of the next video to be able to make our walls look like this, just like this. Change the blue ones over to this. Maybe the red one even turns into this for now. That's fine. But to make it look like this, that's my goal by the end of today. Or next video, I guess, not this video. But we're going to be looking for this. So what we need to do is find out. So we load in this whole image from top left to bottom right. What we need to do is take out this part of that image and apply it to a new image. So essentially cut this out into a new image that we load. So how do we do that? We go in, so for int x equals 0, x is less than, we'll say temp bitmap.width for now. So this is going to go through the entire one. Oops, I put the int outside. X, and then we do want to do int x plus plus. I want to do x here because this is our left to right. And then we'll say a for int y equals 0. Y is less than temp bitmap.height. Y plus plus. So we need to say return bitmap dot set pixel, and it'll be x, y, And then from what they did, we're going to do temp bitmap.getPixel x, y. There we go. So this is generally, well, it's incorrect, but it's generally correct. So once we're done with all of this, we're going to want to say temp bitmap.dispose. We want to release the resources that we had on it. We don't need to have it loaded anymore. We've loaded it. Let's go ahead and close it out. We don't need that file open anymore. However, we are missing some stuff. So if we were to do this, let's go back to that image I had. This one, here we go. And back in. This is going to go through and it's going to set that. In fact, this would error out because this would go beyond 3232 because this goes beyond 3232. So we need to limit that. How do we do that? Well, we set a width equals 32 and a height equals 32. So what we would say is x is less than 32, or we'd say width. That way, if we do a different width, then it would be a different width, and then height. So now this would get the first, by default, the first 32 pixels width and height of this image. Would go 32. Just a heads up, this one's 32 and 32, so we get this like first corner. So that's part one. The other problem is we need to determine if, it's like we want to start here. How do we start here? Well, we know the height is going to be, it's like we want to add the height to an index. So this is really hard to explain the thought process. I don't really remember where I started, like, okay, how do I need to add these things? Because I kind of already knew these from my previous experience. But the other thing to note is x and y, if we're going down, 0 to 32, that's fine. But if x and y is, let's say x is, 33 starting here, then it's going to start at or y is 33, then it's going to be the 33rd pixel of return bitmap, so it's going to fail. So we need to calculate a start, and then we need to calculate an end. And then we need to calculate an index, or well, not calculate an index, we need to have an index for our return bitmap. So let's do the index first because we need to determine that, and that's actually super easy. So to do an index for this, we're going to do int, we'll do 0x index equals 0. And then that's going to be out here, but for every time, actually we're going to put this inside the if here, excuse me. Oops. Go away. Here, there we go. And then inside the x loop, we need to reset y to 0 every time because every x it goes down to 0. So we'll say 0 y index. And then equals 0. And then we need to say at the end of each y loop, we need to 0 y index plus plus. And then at the end of each x loop, we need to say 0 x index plus plus. And then instead of saying set pixel of the return bitmap xy, which could be 400, 500 plus whatever, it could be anything that's beyond it. We need to say 0 x index and 0 y index. So that's already an improvement. However, that's a small improvement. Now we can, since our width and height are since our starting point static at the moment at 0, it doesn't really help that much. Let's define our start x and our start y. So int start x. Actually, before we even get into that, let's just add all the parameters. I'll talk about what we're doing afterwards. This is so hard to describe, and I'm sorry about that. We're going to do, let's see here. So int x index equals 0. Just follow along, copy this code over. I will do my best to explain it afterwards. Int y index equals 0. Int x padding equals 0. Int y padding equals 0. Int y offset equals 0. Int x offset equals 0. And we're not going to need all of these every single time, which is also why these are all defaulting to like 0 and stuff like that. And I'll talk about the y in a moment here. So let's add this. So summary loads a single piece of an image into a usable asset, or asset usable image. Not recommended. for animation. Okay, and I think the best way for me to explain this would be to set up descriptions for each of these parameters. So let's go ahead and set up parameters information. So if you had 3 slashes above your class or your class as well, but above your method, it will add this set up the summary for us. So you can add the same summary if you want, but let's go ahead and define our descriptions for all these parameters. So to do that, you go right after the quote and before the last closing bracket before it says slash param, and we can put descriptions here. So path to the file to load assets to load information from. We'll say that, and if we hover over path, it'll now. Oh, excuse me. We got to add a. It's not supposed to. Oh, it's supposed to be after that, not before it. Excuse me. So after the one character after the quote. So in between that and param. Now, if we hover over path, it'll say it there. So width. How many pixels to search for? To the left or to the right? We'll say horizontally. Horizontally. Is that the right way to spell that? I don't know. And then the height is how many pixels to search for vertically. The X index is, so the value representing how many blocks down, blocks over to look, multiplied by the width. So to put that into perspective, if we have an X index of 0 and a width of 32, let's assume these are 32 wide, it would be 0. And then 0 times 30, or then we have a width of 32 and an X index of 1, it would start at 32, so it would start here. And then 2, 3, 4, and then same thing for the Y index. So we'll say copy this over. And this is good for both me and you guys, because honestly, sometimes these are, like, when you get complicated stuff like this, like that's just a lot going on, or it's not super clear, it's kind of hard to tell unless you have a description that you make. So this is good commenting. The value representing how many blocks down to look multiplied by the height. We'll say the value multiplied by the height. So these are starting points to start, or the Y index start, or the X index start. So we got to specify that. So X padding, the amount of pixels in between blocks left to right. Fortunately, the bitmap that I have right now is not, it's up against each other, so we don't have to worry about that. But sometimes, like for example here, not that we need to worry about it, but you could get like spaces like this in between all of them, and we don't like that. We won't be seeing that here, it looks like, but we may need to worry about that in other ones. Blocks, and we'll say top to bottom, and then looks like I put Y. I'm gonna put Y padding after, so I'll do X offset and Y offset. That bugs the heck out of me. And we're gonna do the same thing here. We're gonna do X offset, Y offset. There we go. So the amount of pixels before the first block starts horizontally. And we'll do the same thing for vertical. The amount of pixels before the first block starts vertically. So again, it looks like since this bitmap is good, we don't need to worry about that. And it's kind of hard to tell because like that it's a PNG and we don't get it. But let's say there's like a margin here, like since there's no like in between, we don't need to worry about it. But if there's a margin here of like 5 pixels or 10 pixels, then the starting point would need to be moved over a little bit. And so you could either crop the image or you could do it programmatically. And since we just have the images, we're not graphic designers here. Maybe some of us are, but it's easier just to do it programmatically and say, hey, just start 5 pixels over and boom. So that's it for that. So those are all our variables. We have a lot. Now, the cool thing is most of these, since we have a good bitmap, we don't need to use. So our methods, when we call this, isn't going to need to be, they're not going to be super long function calls all the time. But now we need to calculate our x start and y start. So this is where things get fun. So let's say int start x equals, so remember we want to start with x index, so x index times width. So that is how many blocks over to start looking. So, start here, start here, start here, start here, etc., times width plus, and we need to do the same thing for padding. We need to multiply it. So we need to say x index times padding, x padding, because if we have, like, let's say we have 10 pixels of padding between each of these, we can't just add 10 pixels like we would at the start. It's 10 pixels here, 10 pixels here, 10 pixels here, and it's times the amount that we're looking for. So we want to say x index times x padding. Now, if it's 0 padding, then we don't need to add anything for padding. That's perfectly fine. And then we want to add the x offset. If there's an offset, we just say, okay, so let's say offset starts here. Let's say we start here and we go boop, 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 boop. Well, we're kind of 10 pixels off, so it adds 10 pixels and we start at the correct spot. So that's how the start x is calculated. And we need to calculate an end x. End x is actually super simple. We could say int end x equals, we could just say start x plus width, because our expected width is, or our width is, how wide the picture needs to be. So we're saying this is 32 pixels by default, and our start x is, let's say 5 over, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then our end is plus 32, goes to the end of this, so it'll calculate that. So that's all end x is. We need to do the same thing for y, and it's actually just the same thing, just with the y values instead of the x values. So equals y index times height plus y index times y padding plus y offset. And then end y equals start y plus height. So pretty straightforward. And then to put these in, so x equals start x. I wanted to put them in here originally when I calculated them. I was like typing them out in here, like doing it in my head. And I was like, well, it doesn't make sense. Or, well, it makes sense, but let's move it up here so our lines aren't super long. And then we'll just say end x. Now, we don't want to do less than or equal to, because if end x is, it'll say end x is 32, like literally. And what that means is, since it's 0 based, that'll end up being 33 pixels, quote unquote, and that'll go out of bounds. So we just say less than. We don't change that. Start y, end y. And okay, so this will go from the correct start to the correct end, and assign the pixels to our return bitmap, and then return that bitmap as an image for something to load from. So that's it for this method. Now we could make it static, so we could say static, and then what we do is we don't need to create an instance of Asset Manager. All we do is say load static asset. We would just say asset manager.load static asset like this, and put in information, and it'll work. We don't need to create an instance. We may end up doing it that way. The thing is, I might want to store that information in here. We'll see. This one is this method works. This will do what we need it to do. This will assign the information and do it. However, if you were to try and do that right now, you would get errors, you would get issues, it wouldn't look right, something like that. So don't get your hopes up right now about that sort of thing. Just don't worry about it. Follow the next video if you want this working, and I'll show you how to get that part working, because there's a little bit more work that goes into it. And I got to figure out where I want to set these things, because there's some performance issues that come about if we do this, run this every single time we load a wall or something. We don't need to be running this 200 times. We calculate this once, we store that value, and then we we leave that in, we put that into maybe a list or something, and then the wall pulls from that list, or I don't know, we'll see. So but there's another thing it has to do. It has to translate, and it has to translate the transform, and it has to translate the the scale, because right now, so assuming it is 32, assuming these are 32, our cubes are 50. So, you put a 32 into a 50 and you get some missing space. So you need to move it over to be 50-50. You have to scale it up. These are actually 70, so I have to scale them down. So before we go, let me get you links to these. I will be leaving links to this pack in the description. So I have this here. So it's opengameart.org. I believe this person ended up getting enough donations so that they didn't need to. Here's their link to their credits. But this has everything we need. This has got all of this stuff here. So we've got tiles. I know it's kind of small here. Let me see if I can zoom in. So it's got tiles for the levels. I know we've got the custom stuff from down here. This is like requested. We've got player characters here. So we're going to be aliens in this game. We've got some different enemies. I think there's some hazards in here too, if I'm not mistaken. I think I saw some hazards somewhere. Oh yeah, here we go. I was looking at them near the enemies here. We got saws, different saws, bees. I thought I saw some spikes somewhere too. I'm sure it's in there somewhere and I'm just missing it. But all sorts of different things. We may also add things like coins and stuff. Let's see. Yeah, so all sorts of different things. So we'll be able to build a bunch of stuff with this and have some fun. So with that said, I know today's video is long for not a lot of work, but this one was kind of hard to explain. My thought process throughout this thing was like I did it as I went and eventually figured it out. A lot of trial and error. So thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.